Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and WJOPLP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, the Reverend Dr. Gail Cantor is here. I found out about her initially when I was curious about the phrase that I'd come across in the last couple of months, End-of-Life Doula or Death Doula, which she has training in. But she's also going to talk to us about the numerous chapter headings that she's had in her professional life, from being a successful corporate consultant to becoming an interfaith minister and eventually a life coach and work that she does now as Endicott College's chaplain and director of spiritual life. She's a living embodiment of another focus of her work, which is conscious aging and helping people shift their focus on retirement to guiding them to re-inspire their lives. So Gail, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show today. I really appreciate it.
Great, thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. So much to learn from you. It's so much to talk about. First of all, let's start with death doula or end-of-life doula, because that term, as I mentioned, was intriguing to me when I first came across it, but also surprising, because doulas in the traditional sense are birth coaches associated with the beginning of the life cycle rather than the end of the life cycle or death. So first of all, can you explain the reason why this term was adopted by people in the field and the perspective on death that it implies?
Yeah, great. Well, I think it has been moving. There have been lots of people moving in this direction for quite a while with the hospice movement and including hospice. People are much more open now to hospice care and having support for the end of life, which I think is it was a great direction, because death is part of life, birth is part of life, and death is part of life. And we tend to, in our culture, like the birth part and try to have a man said to me yesterday, we have a phobia about the death part. We sort of hope it won't come, but it's the one thing everybody's going to do. And so
that's right.
I was intrigued because I thought, yes, we ought to talk about how do you have a good death, as much as a birth doula would talk to an expecting family about having a good birth. I think in the back of our mind is, how will we have a good death? And nobody wants to really have that conversation. And I like the idea that the end-of-life doula programs and organizations like ANELDA and other organizations like that I studied with, that they wanted to say, no, let's have a good death. Let's see, what does the person need, want? What does the family need and want? How can we serve and ease up that conversation so we don't have to live with that fear? We can embrace that part of life as well. And I think that has many implications for our lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even the phrase good death, I think, is something that will make some people go, what? Because it's just not something people like to think about. A number of years ago, I was a clinical social worker, and I went to a workshop on death and dying, taught by he was a psychologist as well as a Buddhist practitioner named Dan Brown. And he said, there aren't that many people here today. I wonder why that is. And I'm curious, as we're talking about this, how do you understand, how has that fear of even talking about or thinking about death gained traction, do you think? What is it about our culture or our social norms that you think make it so frightening or so even taboo, I think, socially kind of inappropriate to use a phrase like good death?
Well, I think that our culture is a lot about trying to stay young or look young or present ourselves young. And I think the lifespan has expanded, and so we live a lot more, and death is more of a rumor down the road, so to speak, and we keep it away. But, in truth, people the not paying attention to it makes it way more of an issue than it really needs, in my view, than it really
Yeah.
needs to be, because everybody's going to age. So a better
Yes.
question than how do I stay young is how do I age gracefully?
Yeah.
How do I transition from one transition to the other
Yeah.
and go from thing to thing without losing my enthusiasm for life and with being the best, I'm 67 years old now. What's the best way to be 67 for me? Instead of like, oh no, don't say I'm more than 39. I'm 39 again. Why would I be 39 again? That was that, and this is this. And I think we're graspy like that. I think maybe that's what he was talking about as a Buddhist. I think
Yeah.
the Buddhists are always imploring us to let go and saying suffering is relieved when we let go.
Right.
But I think we're a very materialistic group, and we grasp and we want to hold on and we want to put things in place. And we say we value the young, value youth, but we don't, in my view, we don't practice that either in terms of, we don't really take care of the quality of life for all the youth.
Yeah.
If we really valued youth, we would. So a better question to me is always, how can I contribute to the generation? I can't make myself them. I work with college students now. I can't make myself a college student, as much as I admire their enthusiasm and, they're beautiful and they have 100% more energy than I do and great and everything else. I could see something, but I can't be that. But how can I contribute to them? How can I help them? How can I be past? There's a book by Rabbi Zalman Schechter, I believe his name is, called From Aging to Saging. How to become sages in our old age, rather than just a bunch of old people
complaining that they're not young anymore.
Exactly.
And the irony is, Gail, because I spent some time studying the field of positive psychology. In all of the surveys that are done trying to assess people's happiness levels show that, and this is always astonishing to young people, but the older you get, the happier people are. And that doesn't mean people don't have challenges, health issues and other kind, financial issues. But in terms of satisfaction with life, the oldest people are actually the happiest people. And I think that's because they're people who have let go of caring about trying to be something that, it's in our genes. We can't stay young. It's a setup for frustration. If that's your goal. Of course, the other part of that is economic issues. There are a lot of products that can be sold people for this. It's like Sisyphus trying to roll the stone up the hill.
Totally.
It's going to keep rolling back down toward you no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So part of what I take from what you're saying is that the kind of movement to try and help people aim at a conscious death, at thinking about folding your awareness of the whole life cycle into your goals and how you think about life and where you are in life, is going to help people not only prepare for a good life, but it's going to help them probably be happier along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it was Plato that said, practice dying. And I think when we give up that fear of death, you also give up the idea that life is going to, like, you can put life in place and hold it. And life doesn't hold in place. It goes, we all have to let go of what we've already done for what we're going to do next. No matter what age we are, that's the one constant thing, is you can bet it's going to change. Here, you don't even have to do very much. And where you work is going to go through changes, and where you live is going to go through changes, and the weather is going to change, and the pandemic's going to come and go, and this is going to happen. So to hold on is really ludicrous and silly and kind of exhausting, and doesn't really do anybody any good. Learning how to transition with grace, I think, to at any, not even the big transition, I guess, the final transition,
Yeah.
but all the transitions along the way. How do we do that gracefully? How do we realize when something's over and let it die? And I think because we're so afraid of death, we also cling to everything we have and do and try to keep in place and put new things in, really nail them down rather than let them unfold and then let them go and then let the new thing emerge, which is more a natural, nature is more like that.
Yeah.
So it's a more organic way to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Organic was the word just going through my mind as
Really?
you were saying that. Absolutely. Because otherwise you're stuck in a posture like this, trying to hang on to things that will, by their very nature, they can't last. It's time that we're fighting against, and we're always going to lose that battle. It strikes me too that the only place that you can really feel alive and be creative and have any kind of leverage over your own life is the present moment. And to be in the present moment, you have to let go of trying to cling to the past. So anyway, a lot of wisdom there in that perspective. And I understand now why they call it End-of-Life Doula. So thank you for that. So I'm curious to find out, how do you integrate this perspective on kind of the cycle of life, the need to let go? How do you integrate this perspective into your coaching and your spiritual direction work with people at different stages of life? Young people, middle-aged people, old people, and how do you help people understand the benefit of doing so?
Yeah, I find myself talking to people a lot about the transition that they're in, or the or the challenges of the time that they're in. So for example, and I like to speak in a language, you'll appreciate this from positive psychology, even though I really haven't studied that, but I kind of get the idea. Instead of, it's easy to say I'm anxious, like a college student. Yeah, it's a big buzzword, anxiety.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And listen, I have as much respect as anybody. And when I feel someone needs mental health care, then that's what people need. I have no stigma about that. And I think it's wonderful that we focus there and that kids today are not as hung up about admitting to their anxiety as some. But a little bit, it gets to run rampant and become an explanation for everything. I'm anxious. And I like to say to people, well, some amount of your anxiety is warranted. You know why? It's your first time away from home. It's your first time you're managing your whole life. It's your first time you're navigating social life where you live with the people. And if you have a fight, then they hate you on your whole dorm floor or whatever. It really could be huge losses. So here we are. But if someone comes to understand, oh, this is just normal. Like, of course, I feel some anxiety. Everybody who goes through a transition, when I go from one thing to the next, I changed my career later in life. I decided I wanted to pursue interfaith ministry and be a chaplain and I don't even know what I was doing at the time I did it, but I knew I wanted to make a change.
Yeah.
And there's an amount of what one could label as anxiety and get really stuck in if you wanted to, when you start to let go of the old thing and you start to take on the new thing. And all of a sudden you were high man on the totem pole. Now you're low. So you were looking out across vistas, and now all of a sudden you just see the ground and you're worried about if it's going to work and if people are going to make that change with you and if you know what you're doing and if your old strengths apply and what are you going to need to know. And now you're a student instead of a teacher and all of these different things. So I think the benefit, and I think the way to deal with it at any stage is to say, oh, this person is at this stage of life. Yeah. How then should they be feeling, and what's the challenges, and what are the pains, and what cures the pain? And so then it's easy to provide spiritual direction or coaching of some sort when you start there, because then people
Yes.
need, and they may need support to handle the anxiety that comes with that. Fine.
Yeah.
Then there's plenty of support for that. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people, if they understand that, like, I know if I say to myself, oh, well, it's because there's a change going on here. So,
Yeah.
I feel unstable. Why? Because there's a
Yeah.
change going on here. Okay.
Right.
I'm okay. I lived in San Francisco for a while once, and there was an earthquake, and that's very unsettling feeling. And a lot of people haven't been through that. It's very, very unsettling. But as soon as you say to yourself, this is an earthquake, you look around, you see if you're okay physically, if you're not going to get killed by something falling on you. And then if that's the case, then you go, okay, it's going to stop. We're going to pull ourselves together. We're going to deal with what went on here, and we're going to do it. Life is the same way. There are earthquakes and storms and whatever. And I think that acceptance, not the avoidance never works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of what I take out of what you're saying is that there's a power in naming what's going on for you.
Completely.
There's a stabilizing power in it, because then it gives you a frame of reference that you can center yourself within that naming that event, whether it's an earthquake or a new dorm.
Exactly.
And also what you're doing, I think, that has so much wisdom in it, is that you're helping people understand that life is a series of changes. And if you learn to understand that change is constant, you're very Buddhist, as we were saying, then it equips you to recognize what stage of the change you're in. And that helps you understand some of your emotions. It makes me think about, I don't know if you know William Bridges' book, Transitions.
Oh, absolutely.
But that model correlates, and it's a very simple model, but it's very powerful and useful. It's simple. It's simply endings, neutral zone, and that's the power phrase, and then new beginnings. Because neutral zone is that area of vagueness and lack of definition. It's by definition, the in-between state where you're not sure where you're standing, because what you had is gone, and what's going to take place hasn't taken complete shape yet. And it's inevitable that we're going to spend some good portion of our life in neutral zones, because change is a constant. And I think
even more time than we spend. I always remind myself, because this is a place I think people get really wacky, is that when it turns out, that's usually the shorter part of that equation in my view.
That's right.
So when the thing is over, you linger there and you say, is it really over? I don't know. Is that time in my life over? Should I really, when I left corporate consulting and I had a business, we did seminars and corporate consulting, and I sort of knew I needed to leave it, but it took me a while. Had that business for 23 years. It was hard to say, yes, pull the plug. So that part lingers around and kind of marinates. Then the uncertain part takes some real work usually, and takes some real commitment to let go of things, get rid of things, take new things in, find new people that, it's usually new socially and everything else. And then the time, I was saying to someone the other day, all of a sudden the other day, I felt like, wow, everything turned out. I feel really good. I feel really good here. I feel really good here. I like where I live. This is my little checklist of when things feel good, felt good. And right behind that, I thought to myself, this won't last long. And it's not because it's not because I'm down on anything. It's just the way it is. Those moments of great don't last that long. And the ones that the challenges really take something from us.
Yeah, absolutely. But, what you're saying rings absolutely true to me, because I think that feeling that you've arrived at the new beginning, it kind of means that the seeds of novelty have already been spread. They're already starting, they're beneath the ground. They're starting to gather. They're starting to fertilize, they're gathering to gather energy, because you're arriving in the new place is a signal that kind of what did Dylan Thomas call it? The force that drives the green fuse through the flower.
Right.
It never stops.
Yes.
And the good thing about that, as inconvenient as that can be, it means we're still alive. So,
Right.
and that's a
That's
good
right.
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Gail, shifting gears a little bit, getting back to the end of life work and death awareness, because as you were saying, some of this movement grew out of the hospice movement, and trying to help people um, get comfortable with the phrase a good death and
Yeah.
help them to be able to figure out what kind of process will enable them to prepare themselves for a good death. So I'm curious to find out, um, what do people, in your experience, who are confronting their own prospective death, because that's where people in hospice are,
Right.
because that diagnosis means usually 6
Sure.
months. Um, so what did they need, and possibly even more so, or certainly equally so, their family members or friends? What do
Yeah.
they need to be able to talk about or think through to be able to plan for a good death? And what do you find sometimes hinders them from doing that?
Right. I think I think the thing that hinders and the thing that helps line up with each other, which is communication. I think people or talk, conversate, like bringing it up. There's a lot of people that don't want to say a word about it. And there's a lot of like, I don't want this one to feel bad. I don't want that one to feel bad. I don't want the person to, I don't want the person. I always think, well, okay, the truth sets us free. So the more
Yeah.
comfortable, a lot of times I think that the biggest thing, because I've had lots of people call me, how I got interested in this is people would, besides, I used to teach courses where we talked about the fear of death and whatever, and that was important. But then when my mother passed, which was 14 years ago, and I had supported her, and I was quite open about, I mean, it just wasn't an issue to discuss it, but a lot of people would call me when their parents are near the end of life,
Mm,
and
yeah.
they're all worried and they don't talk. And I said, well, did you talk to them?
Yeah.
I said, if they're especially older people, I mean, there are tragic deaths. Look, when someone gets killed in a car accident or dies at a young age or, commits suicide, whatever, there are tragic deaths. And don't get me wrong, but when, especially in a situation, either someone has some illness and they're going to pass and they're suffering and they need to complete that and go, then the more open people can be around them and say what needs to be said. um, what will I feel bad on the other side of it if I don't do, or
Yeah.
if I don't say,
Yeah.
or if I don't make my wishes known. So, there's also the being comfortable part and listening to the music you like and having
Yeah.
the surroundings you want and having the flow of people at the level you can tolerate and, all of those kind of circumstantial things. But I think in the biggest sense, it's whether there can be an openness and people have the
Mm,
room to communicate and say to the person what's on their mind, and the more you can open that up, the better.
yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the doula work is, just as a doula, one of the things they train in the doula courses is to go to the person and talk to the person, almost interview the person. I mean, there is like sort of an intake interview, so to
Mm,
speak, where you'd interview the person about what is important to them and what are the kinds of things. There's a document they used in our doula course. They recommended a thing called 5 Wishes, which
oh.
people could order online. I haven't used it yet, but there are lots of these different things. But that's one
Mhm.
where people could actually, even before they are have a diagnosis, just because you're a person, this is where you're going. Um, Start to think about it. I bought a book recently that's like a workbook about you're leaving behind you your wishes when you die. And I thought, okay, what am I doing with this? So I put it on a shelf. And then, interestingly enough, every now and again, I come across something that I own, a piece of jewelry or whatever. And I think, I'm going to make sure so and so gets this when I die.
Oh,
And I don't plan to die anytime soon,
yeah.
but so now I get the book out and I write it in the book and I know it's going to be documented somewhere. that
Yeah.
this is the case. And so being in that process and kind of owning people's wishes and intentions. And I think the worst thing in the world is to feel like your time of being intentional is over. I don't think that ends. I don't even know if it ends after we die. Who knows? That I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No
But
one does.
until we
Yeah.
die, for sure, you could be intentional.
Yeah.
And you could try to communicate what you actually wish, but people have to be willing to listen to that. And a lot of times, kids don't want to talk to their parents about their death. We don't want to bring it up with the sick person. Well, the sick person, they know, and they're dealing with
Yeah.
it.
That's
And
right.
they need friends. They need people who will talk about it, not people who will avoid it.
Yeah. I love the idea of remaining intentional as long as you're conscious.
Yes.
And it strikes me that you're also you're creating your legacy. Like
Exactly.
thinking about this is who I want. You're picturing who you want that jewelry to be on. And that's part of a legacy that you can participate in creating. So there's creativity there. And there's also continuity that you're building and creating there. And that strikes me as adding a great deal of meaning to the concept of a good death.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I also, I think that sometimes I've come across people who will say, you know, either with somebody who has just lost somebody and is grieving their death, and they don't think they should ask about it. They don't think they should bring up the person who died. They think it's in poor taste to do so. I could do that. As well as people, as you were just referencing, who feel like, well, I shouldn't bring it up. I can't ask them about it, or they're afraid to do so to protect
Right.
themselves. But somebody who has just lost somebody who and is grieving is thinking about their grief all the time, and all they have left are memories.
Exactly.
And I think that to overcome that sense somehow that it's taboo, and if people don't want to talk about it, they'll tell you. But
That's
often there's this self-protective kind of dance. People who may
that's
need
right.
very much to talk about. People can feel very isolated. I think sometimes when they're ill, and of course they're thinking about their own death. And part of
Exactly.
a good death is being able to talk about what you're afraid of, what you wonder about, what you want your legacy to be, what your wishes are. I like that.
Exactly. And what the family wants also, and how the family wants to keep that person's memory alive, or their
Right.
values alive, or who, their unique qualities alive. I think that's a really important part of it. And when we don't give that with the willingness to listen, a lot of times it's because we're protecting ourselves
Yes. Yeah.
from the fear, from our
Yeah.
own ideas about death and dying.
Right.
It really doesn't have to do with serving. If you really asked what serves the person, a lot of times towards the end of life, people want to review their life and the meaning
Right.
of their life, and
Right.
make sense of certain things that maybe they hadn't made sense of thus far. And
Yeah.
so to make some room for that conversation, a lot of times a doula can be somebody who can do that and be that kind of a friend
Yeah.
when maybe the family doesn't have the room
Yeah.
to be that. It's too raw, or
Well,
yeah,
that strikes me as being a really important role to play, and I think a really gratifying role, I would think, to be
absolutely.
able to play.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Well, and another part of, I know, the philosophy that you engage with and advance is the whole concept of conscious aging, which you've talked about somewhat already. But I wonder if we could return to it and talk a little bit more about what you think makes conscious aging so critically important, and when does it begin?
Well, I think it begins when you're born, to be honest. I think you're aging and you're trying to be conscious, or to me, I think being conscious is superior to being unconscious,
Mm.
going through life unconsciously. I think our unconsciousness knocks us upside the head a lot.
That's a good way to
So,
put it. Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's good to be conscious at any age. But I think when you get past, for a lot of people, 50 starts to be an age when you go, I'm 50. There's a feeling of more than halfway or something where, your mortality becomes more real. And then if you thought about it, your 60s, your 70s, you start to lose people around you who are your contemporaries, usually in your 60s. You might lose somebody in your 60s, your 50s, whatever. So it becomes increasingly more real to you. And I think that should be embraced, not pushed away, and should be factored in. Like, oh, I may not see the whole, when you're younger, you think, oh, you're just here. It's ongoing. But when you get older, you think, okay, well, I'll probably, if you really thought it through, you're going to see certain things in your lifetime and not other things in your lifetime. Is there anything you want to pass on to the younger people in your life, or things you want to do? And I'm not big on the bucket list. It's just not my kind of thing. I've never been a listy kind of this kind of list. But if you have intentions, or you have, if something, some people have an encore career that that's in their minds, to do, something that's been important to them during their career, and now they want to do it. And how do you announce yourself, so to speak, or build that in? And I think a lot of times, that's the case. And some people don't have that, but a lot of people do.
I think a lot of people do. And I think you've tagged 50 as, sometimes the marker age for that, because I think it's when people start to recognize the next chapter leads to the last chapter. And before that, it's kind of like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, but it's kind of like, oh, this is the final act. And I think that kind of galvanizes a certain awareness that if there is something that's really important to me to do, not so much in a bucket list sense, but in the sense of some kind of meaning, or something that was really important to me, I wanted to learn how to do, or some kind of work that I put off because it's what I really wanted to do, and there were other forces, family or cultural or financial forces, that prevented me from doing that. People figure out, I better go back to that graduate program now, or I'm never going to get there.
Exactly.
Or I better make that shift. I always wanted to be a minister or a counselor. And I better, I only have, in this lifetime, I have one shot at it. So let me start now. And that's a powerful awareness, the consciousness of that, because I think it gets people in touch with some fairly deep forces in their psyches that have been percolating probably all their lives. And yet for various reasons, they may have said no to them, or not yet, or not, but at a certain point, it's now or never. So that's conscious age. I like that phrase, by the way, conscious aging. And I like
I think, the Fetzer Institute has done a lot of work with conscious aging. And I think that also, the older you get, the more sensible you can get in a way. You go, okay, why am I buying this? It's not, do you know what I mean? It's not like a never ending, what do I really need? What do I really want? How do I really want to live? What do I really want to invest myself in? Where when you're younger, you might be a little more spread out. And the other thing too, is I think people's parents start to get older and a lot pass. And the passing of one's parents, I lost my dad when I was very young, when I was 6, but my mom, 14 years ago. So I think 50s, 60s, whatever, you lose your parents as well. And there's something about the absence of your parents that is an awakening to consciousness as well. Like the backup crew is, the backup is gone here. I mean,
that's right.
Not for everybody, but for many people.
Well, you're the leading generation heading toward death.
Exactly.
In the past, you have these bookends in front of you.
Exactly.
Or a friend of mine who wasn't young when she said this, after both of her parents died, she said, I'm an orphan now. So, it's a powerful emotional experience when both parents are gone. And, you kind of have to kind of reshape your thinking about your own life cycle at that point. Well,
Exactly.
I know, Gail, you have a particular language that you use in your coaching, and you talk to people about, you know, focus less on thinking about retiring, and let's think about re-inspiring your life, which is a
Right.
wonderful word.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the power you think that word re-inspiring has in your
Yeah.
experience working with people, and how do you help people have faith that they can get there?
Right. I think it's my unique nature, my nature that I was born with to be into inspiration. I feel like it's a superpower in a certain sense when you can be moved, inspired, um, when spirit runs through you. To me, that means that the breath of, the spirit kind of runs through things. And I'm a fairly practical person. I can make a lot of things happen and do projects and things like that, but only if I'm inspired.
Ah.
It's a blessing and a curse for me, because if I'm not into it, forget it. I'm not doing it. And that's just the way my life has always been. And so I think I have some connection to inspiration that I can contribute. And I think a lot of people go through their life and neglect their inspiration in a sense. Like,
Mhm.
it's okay. They go, well, I work at an institution, and some people, mostly here, it's a pretty inspired group. But every now and again, there's somebody, they're just going to work every day,
Mhm.
and they have to go
Yeah,
to work, and they must, and they need
yeah,
to, and they should. And so that makes you old right away.
yeah.
And if you feel like I have to now stop, I have to give up my interests, or I have to reduce my interests, or I should downsize my life, or I should, yeah, along the way you do downsize your life, maybe, or maybe you could downsize your life for a lot of reasons. A lot of kids are thinking of downsizing their life because they
Mm,
see they don't want to work the way their parents worked, or
yeah,
they whatever. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. But I like when we're doing things like that because we're inspired
yeah,
about who we can be now and what we can do. And we're trying to be moved and have the invisible parts of life, the spiritual parts of life, the connection with something greater show up in the practical things that we do. When that disconnects for me, I'm useless. So I think I talk about it with my clients out of my own survival. Like, I have nothing else. I don't really have that much else to offer in a funny, like,
well,
anything I have to offer comes from that, comes from that superpower in a way. Like, what is inspirational? What is worth it? What is meaningful? What lights up life. I love Howard Thurman, the Reverend Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King's college chaplain.
mm.
But anyway, um, he said something. I'm going to butcher the quote, but think about what lights you up and live that, because
Yeah,
the world needs people not to do a certain thing,
yeah,
but needs people who are lit up. And
yeah,
we do. The world does need people who are inspired. Look at the damage that gets done by people who are seeking power, or
yeah,
trying to make the most money, or
right,
and I'm not against money and I'm not against power.
yeah.
I just don't think you ought to get them without the connection to inspiration.
Well, that is a very inspiring evocation of the power of inspiration.
Yeah.
And I imagine that it resonates with the people that you work with because it comes from a real authenticity in you as your superpower. It's interesting. It strikes me as a wonderful superpower to have. I have a theory, Gail, that everyone has a superpower, but it's one that we discover we don't get to choose. Unfortunately,
That's
mine is parallel parking.
a
But
good one.
inspiration is a wonderful, potent superpower to have.
Yeah.
And parallel parking is important, and don't get me wrong, but I can hear from the way you talk about it that you are clearly the fire of inspiration shines brightly within you, and I'm sure that the people you work with experience and benefit from that enormously. So Well, I'd like to, I know that one of the ways that you re-inspired your life was your current work at Endicott, following other chapter headings in your life. And you mentioned to me in our conversation preparing for today's show that it was very soon after you began working at Endicott that we all witnessed the tragic murder of George Floyd, which challenged us all to confront not just immediate police brutality, but also the long history of systemic racism in the United States that it's a symptom of. And I know that you have spoken of always having had passion for social justice. So I'd be curious to find out, Gail, how have you found ways to integrate these values for social justice into your work at Endicott? And in response to, what happened with George Floyd and the nation's awakening happily around systemic racism, what kind of actions and goals have the students that you work with been mobilized to undertake?
Okay. Yeah, awakening is a very good word there, because I think when we're awake, we tend to do the right thing, and when we're asleep and unconscious, we don't do the right thing. So awakening is the big thing. I last year, I've been at Endicott almost 3.5 years now. But so after George Floyd died, I was asked by the president of the college to be the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, which before that had been a committee and whatever, but to ramp it up. In other words, this is, focus here, and let's get some focus on this, which I was really honored. I am honored to be and to have that opportunity. And a lot of what I'm the advisor of a club that the students started that's part of a nationwide organization called Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice,
Oh,
which was started by students of color here, but mostly, it's really about ending white silence. It's really about becoming good allies and becoming somebody. And that's what I have really taken on as in my whole life, I think, is I want to be a good ally. I want to provide something. I want to be part of the I want to go in the direction of justice and equality, equity and inclusion. And whatever I can do to do that, I want to do. And so it's given me a good opportunity here to work with the staff, and we've brought a lot of speakers in. We did recently had about 30 faculty and staff go through a program called Intergroup Dialogue, which is supported a lot by the University of Michigan, and is about the kind of conversations that need to take place in the social justice world. How can people of different identities communicate and be in dialogue, not in debate, or not in division, or not in just discussing and going on without anything happening? But how do we have a really healthy? So we're really training ourselves here, and there's a lot of movement and a lot of and kind of listening, where can we provide things? Like a lot of our students go on internships, and that's one of our strengths at Endicott, is that people go and they have internships and be out in the work world. And in the work world now, people are asking people for their diversity, equity, and inclusion statements on an application or whatever. So we're working on internship modules that people can prepare themselves before they go on their internships. What is your DEI statement? What do you have to confront about your own implicit bias? Two of my colleagues in student affairs created a microaggressions training. And the kinds of things we say, a lot of people don't even know what a microaggression is, but a microaggression is like a thing you say to somebody in a marginalized community that's hurtful, and you didn't really mean to be hurtful, but we're so used to saying these things. A friend of mine calls it death by 1,000 cuts. It's not a slow death. It's not like you just call them some terrible name. You quietly diminish them. You're kind of in the course of human events.
Mhm.
So they've been doing that course all over our
Mm.
campus and with our students, with our staff, with our faculty. So people are waking up and saying, wow, because I don't think people want to, most good people want to be part of the solution. I mean,
Yeah.
there's white supremacy and there's whatever. But
Yeah.
in my day-to-day life, I'm dealing less with that. And I'm dealing more with people who would wake up if they knew like want to wake up and then want to have some support when they're
Yeah.
awake, to read the right things, to get interested, to educate themselves, and then to really confront their own ways they have been complicit in the issue, in the problem,
Yeah.
which for a lot of people, it's closing their eyes, basically,
Yeah.
or not realizing it's a problem. It's more that for most, I think for most people.
Yeah.
And then we have these other big extreme issues which need to be dealt with. I don't know that that's necessarily my work,
Mhm.
but I know my work is waking people up and having people feel like, oh, I could move forward with this. And
Mhm.
I'm always talking about becoming a good ally. And when people
Yeah.
say, well, what is that? I say, I don't even know that I know.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even important to know
Mhm.
exactly what that means. It's important that you want to be that. Now you'll find out, go read something and find out, what do you think would make you a good ally? It's not just helping people out.
Yeah.
It's not just, when I was younger, a lot, I felt like, oh, we need to contribute to these marginalized communities, contribute. It's like, instead of have it, give, which I still, we need to do plenty of that. But we also need to do what resolves the systems and
Mhm.
the issues and the greater politics of it and the policies and the systemic racism that's built in, that isn't resolved just by giving someone a handout,
Yeah.
but it really needs policy change and things like
Yeah.
that. So you educate yourself. And I think that's the most important thing, is you wake up and you go in a direction, and then you have a willingness. The other thing is, I think one thing I know I'm working on all the time is trying to make it safe for people to make mistakes,
Mm.
because without, we used to talk a lot about safe space, and now people are talking about brave space. And I think that's a very
Interesting.
important distinction, because
Yeah.
in safe space, we want to coddle everybody, and we don't want to say the wrong thing to anybody of color. We don't want to say the wrong thing
Yeah.
to the LGBTQ community. We want to do the right thing. So I have to be on edge here all the time, instead of, no, I'm awake. I know who I am as a person. I want to do the right thing, and I want to be a good ally. And I'm probably going to make a ton of mistakes. So
Yeah.
I'm going to get out there past my comfort zone, not way past where I feel like like horribly uncomfortable, but enough where I'd have to be brave to
Yeah.
engage. And that's good for people. And I think we need a lot of that, because I think people have been kind of put to sleep by like,
Yeah.
well, don't don't say anything that might, I like to ask people questions. Is this offensive to you? Does
Yeah.
this work? Does that, how do if there's a transgender student that's going to come to the college, they have questions that another prospective student does not have. Someone needs to be willing to say, what are the questions that you have? We're happy
Right.
to hear them. And
Right.
even though that might be uncomfortable, because on the other hand, you want to say, oh, everybody do the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same
Yeah.
for everybody.
Right. But that opens the possibility for dialogue. I love that phrase, brave space, because it means you can communicate. I think the danger when people feel like they can't ask is when people suppress themselves. There's an underlying kind of resentment that starts to build up.
Absolutely.
And I think by also you encourage courageous action, and also, as you were saying, that you can make mistakes, you can learn from them. There's a power in that, and it's great modeling. Oh, I feel very encouraged. Many way there are many ways in which I feel that the coming generation, um, is hopeful.
Yes.
and creates hope in me because of their bravery
Yeah.
and their effectual idealism. Let me put it
Yeah.
that way. So thank you for that, Gail. That was really inspiring.
Yeah.
Of course, you're using your superpower all the time.
There you go.
Well, Gail, one more question I have for you. Your work at Endicott clearly is an inspiring example of your living a continually re-inspired life, and it clearly distills and amplifies many of your prior interests and values. But inspiration to me implies it's an active process. I envision it as a kind of a spark or ignition that's a prelude to acceleration and change. So I wonder if you have glimpses of what your current chapter is laying the groundwork for you, or is it too soon?
Maybe a little too soon, although I am investing myself I'm really working, I'm working on more advanced chaplaincy training too, because I feel like the idea of what a college chaplain is hasn't been explored fully. So I don't know exactly what I plan to do with that. And then I'm also studying various kinds of meditation. Not in the way people just think of meditation like stress relief, but meditation more as a self-reflective way to connect with the higher interests in
Yeah.
life and who
Uh-huh.
you are. And so I'm doing some work, some training in mindfulness work and meditation, because I feel like there's a future. People need to stop and contemplate and think and know themselves in
Yeah.
a more powerful way. And that's always been things that I've worked on, but
Yeah.
I used to work on it more thinking like, oh, well, in community, we sort of find ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's been an awakening to me over the last 10 years or so to say, no, wait, I have to go inside here and be able to have these conversations with myself and kind of investigate my own who I am in that way. And so that's something that I'm working on now as well.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
and I know that many good things will come of that. So be sure and reach back out to me. You can come back on the morning show as it
Thank
gets
you
clear,
so
because I
much.
know it will be inspiring. The last question is, Gail, as people have been listening to you talk about being an end-of-life doula or conscious aging or re-inspiring, are there suggestions or resources that you might want to outline for people who might want to learn more about these approaches, how they could benefit from them?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you just go Google end-of-life doula, you'll find a lot because so many people are coming into the field. I studied with ANELDA, which is an organization, INELDA, and they have a lot of great resources on their website that lead to a lot of other great resources. And I think that that's an important, that can be an important way to go. But yeah, and there's a lot of information now on the internet about a lot of people getting into the field and working in that
Wonderful.
way. Yeah, definitely.
Well, Gail, you've just been a fund of wisdom and inspiration on many topics. I thank you so much. It's been
Thank
wonderful to have you on the morning show. I've learned so much and been inspired by talking to you. I really appreciate you taking time to visit us and talk about these many different chapter headings in your life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate
It's
it.
been totally my pleasure. But we're
Okay.
out of time for today's show, everybody. So thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. My guests will be historians and authors of the book, If These Stones Could Talk, Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck. They're what I call restorative historians. I learned about their fascinating research in an article in the New York Times titled Uncovering Lost Black History Stone by Stone. Their research on the lives of African Americans buried at Stoutsburg Cemetery on Sourland Mountain in New Jersey enabled them to make what they've described as astonishing discoveries. And they've provided now a model and resources for historians and citizens throughout America for how you can surface the missing lives and contributions of African Americans. Also, they're totally charming and wonderful people, and I promise you'll enjoy them very much. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show, www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and then click on playlist and scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3, and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org, click on the cloud, and scroll down. That's it for today, everybody. Thanks for watching or listening. See you next Thursday at 9 on 9 for the morning show.